Let's start today's story on Geonosis during Attack of the Clones. Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Padme are in pursuit of Count Dooku as he attempts to flee the planet. The Clone Wars have just begun as they fly past the gigantic backdrop of war between the Republic and the Separatists. As the Jedi's Republic gunship gets closer to Dooku, they are hit by a Separatist droid and Padme loses balance, causing her to fall out of the ship and into the desert dunes. In the original timeline, Obi-Wan convinces Anakin to remain on the gunship so that they can duel Dooku together. But what if Anakin ignores his master's wishes and jumps after Padme? As Anakin leaps out of the ship, Obi-Wan calls out to his apprentice, but it was no use. He was gone. Kenobi knew that he had to keep going. This was a great chance for them to defeat Dooku. When Obi-Wan and Dooku fight, Kenobi would be killed with immense ease. In Attack of the Clones, Dooku beat Obi-Wan and Anakin simultaneously. Without Anakin to help delay the fight until Yoda's arrival, Kenobi would simply be executed. Meanwhile, Anakin would have ensured that Padme is okay and called for another gunship, but they would arrive around the same time as Yoda to find Kenobi's lifeless body. Anakin screams out in hatred and regret. This was his fault. He had caused it. Yoda's stoic emotions asked Anakin what happened. He could sense the conflict within the boy. He truly believed it was his fault. Filled with guilt, Anakin would tell the Grand Master everything, including his brief romance with Padme, who stood there shocked. Yoda was disappointed, but for now they would mourn Anakin and deal with his future later. After the funeral, to which the entire Jedi Order was present, Anakin was summoned to the council chambers. After much deliberation, they decided that Anakin would be expelled from the Jedi Order for breaking the code, resulting in a Jedi's death. Windu was the main promoter of this choice. He disregarded Anakin's status as the Chosen One and believed that everyone should be equally accountable to the Jedi Code and subsequent breaches of that code. After Anakin left the Order, he didn't know what to do with himself. He would move in with Padme, who continued her political career as the Senator for Naboo. They would get married publicly. Since Anakin wasn't a Jedi Knight anymore, he had the freedom to do whatever he liked. However, the young boy was filled with grief. He had lost his master and best friend, and although he had just married Padme, he had been expelled from his family, cast away in the blink of an eye like it meant nothing to him. He wondered what his mother must be thinking now, or Qui-Gon. He had failed them both. Padme would encourage Anakin to speak with Palpatine. Ever since he arrived on Coruscant, Palpatine had been the boy's mentor. At first, he was ashamed to go into his office, believing that the Chancellor would be disappointed or perhaps even resent him. But secretly, Palpatine knew that he could use this to his advantage. He had hoped for Anakin to remain in the Order for a while longer, but his expulsion and death of his master were unforeseen events that would bolster the grief, anger, and fear within him, all tenets of the dark side. Palpatine would use this opportunity and ask Anakin to come work with him. Anakin was extremely pleased and thankful, accepting this offer graciously. Anakin became the personal bodyguard to the Chancellor, and Palpatine demoted many of Sly Maul's responsibilities, giving them to Anakin. The Chancellor was able to negotiate with the Jedi Order to allow Anakin to legally retain his lightsaber as he used it to protect the head of the Republic. As war had just begun, this new enrollment from Palpatine appeared very logical in the eyes of the Senate and the people of the Republic. There was no better protector, but also, his wife was highly respected senator and this would only bolster the relations going on in the Senate. Almost everyone supported this decision, except the Jedi. The Jedi felt cheated, and they felt uneasy knowing someone of Anakin's stature and immense level of power was now also the personal assistant to the Chancellor. As time went on, it was clear that Palpatine included him in some of the decision-making process for different things. Though he didn't make the final choice, the Chancellor would constantly ask for his opinions on matters. In the Jedi Council's eyes, this was the equivalent of appointing a Jedi to be Supreme Chancellor. They believed that far too much power was being centralized into Anakin. But Palpatine held the jurisdiction over this decision, and ultimately, there was nothing done wrong. And so, Anakin and Padme would spend a lot of time together. The Republic and wider galaxy was becoming unstable. The Clone Wars had begun and the Jedi had been launched into battle against the Separatists. Palpatine was extremely busy and required Anakin by his side at all times to assist him. Palpatine would tell Anakin every piece of information he learned, and Anakin had the power to use any resource he desired to figure out things. He essentially held the same power that Palpatine did, just not officially. His responsibilities including acting as personal bodyguard for the Chancellor due to his Jedi powers. He would run errands, manage Palpatine's schedule, help with decision making, and even stand next to him whilst he spoke in the Senate chamber. Palpatine had done this all on purpose, to gain his trust, but also to allow him to further his manipulations of the boy and corrupt his mind against the dogmatic views of the Jedi. Turning him against the Jedi would be very easy after their apparent lack of faith and trust in Skywalker. Windu would constantly make disruptions in the Senate, visit Palpatine in his office to discuss Anakin, and even made several claims in the courts to remove him from the Senate, all of which were unsuccessful due to Palpatine's influence. Anakin's responsibilities were beginning to overshadow Mas Amedda, the Vice Chancellor of the Republic. Throughout the Clone Wars, Padme also worked closely with Palpatine, and the trio became a very effective force of power in the political realm. The administration and approval of Palpatine's leadership rubbed off onto Anakin and Padme, and their marriage and relationship turned them into celebrities. Anakin was finally happy. He was restricted by the dogmatic rules of the Jedi. He was openly married to Padme, and he worked high in the Republic. Everything was going the way he desired. Anakin and Padme had dinner most nights with Palpatine as they discussed the state of the Republic, different battles, and issues relating to the Clone War and how best to tackle these situations. Debates were long and loud as Padme advocated for more diplomatic solutions with Palpatine and Anakin voting for a more practical force. The Chosen One accompanied Palpatine on diplomatic missions across the Republic as he brought more systems under their control. Anakin would do anything for the Chancellor, and he blindly became his most loyal follower. At this point, there was nothing anyone could ever say that would turn him against Palpatine. However, this was all done under Palpatine's plan. He began to plant seeds of doubt into Anakin's mind. During their long missions, he spoke ill of the Jedi. Anakin already resented them for expelling him, but from Palpatine's continuous comments backstabbing him, his hatred only increased towards them. Eventually, Padme falls pregnant, much to their delight. Anakin and Padme's life continued for the next year, as they fought hard for the Republic, served Palpatine, and believed they were coming close to victory. Despite this, the Jedi continued to be concerned. The doubts for Anakin and his life only increased when there was news of Padme becoming pregnant. The High Council, including Windu, who was becoming increasingly disillusioned and overshadowed by the pressures of warfare, began to act completely inappropriately to Anakin and his family. They wanted to train the children and demanded that he would give them up to the Jedi, knowing that the offspring of the Chosen One would hold immense power. Windu advocated in the council that if the children stayed under Anakin and his tutelage, they may be burdened with the dark side, disregarding any faith in the former Jedi. These actions were not uncommon for the Jedi, who were known to take children from parents without consent. The Jedi believed that Force-sensitive beings are inherently the property of the Jedi Order. They made reference to Republic legislation that allowed this, but even the courts would have the decision for how they would interpret this legislation. Technically, both Anakin and the Jedi were right in their own way. Yoda and Windu attempted to reason with Anakin, but Skywalker wouldn't even meet with them as he knew everything they were going to say. Naturally, he despised the idea of letting his children grow up with the Jedi. There was no logic to the decision. The war had changed the Jedi, caused them to fall down a path where they weren't relying on the will of the Force, but on their own inherent fears and desires. The return of the Sith had caused the High Council to become extremely disillusioned with the dark side. They feared it, and they would stop at nothing to ensure it didn't grow. Eventually, Padme would successfully give birth to twins, naming them Luke and Leia. The Council's fears had come full circle, and that night, Windu took the 187th Legion to take the children. In his mind, this was no different than traveling to Sheely to take a young Force-sensitive Togruta. Arriving, Windu tells Skywalker to hand the children over. They are now the property of the Jedi Order. Anakin gets defenses very quickly. This confrontation had been building ever since Padme fell pregnant, but even before that when he was expelled. Windu always hated Anakin, and now he would take his revenge. Anakin ignites his lightsaber and points it at Windu. He will protect his children at all cost. The 187th Legion raises their blasters, setting it to stun. Windu scoffed under his breath. He knew it was the wrong decision allowing the boy to keep his lightsaber. Windu ignites his amethyst blade and tells Anakin to surrender. When Anakin refuses, the clones begin to fire stun bullets at the former Jedi. As Anakin defends, he senses Windu going to collect the children. This causes Anakin to snap, and he raises his fist, pushing all the clones into the air and rendering them unconscious. Anakin points his blade at the Jedi Master. A smirk grazes Windu's face. He knows what's about to happen. He's been waiting a long time for this. Anakin leaps towards him and begins to swing his blade. Blue versus purple. They swung with strength and precision, attempting to find any way through the defenses. Windu relied on the Form 7 fighting style, even tapping into his personal variant of a pod to gain the upper hand. Anakin began to rely on his rage, his determination, and passion to protect his children, all qualities excluded from the Jedi. Windu recognized this and knew that it was the correct decision to take the children. Windu was clearly the superior fighter as he disarms Anakin and kicks him to the floor, pointing his saber towards his throat. Windu had won, and he commanded Skywalker's surrender. As hate dripped like sweat from Anakin's body, they both sent someone arriving at the door. It was the Chancellor. Windu was confused, and he told the Chancellor to leave, that this affair doesn't involve him and he's out of his jurisdiction. Anakin Skywalker is a traitor. He was sick and tired of Palpatine defending Anakin and giving him further promotions to enhance his power. It's time all of that ends. Windu's hate for Anakin was blinding him. Palpatine orders Windu to stop. Anakin is his pupil, and as Chancellor, he has the power to protect and pardon any crimes. Palpatine was cunning, and he knew how to use his position as Chancellor to overrule the Jedi. Windu scoffed and didn't accept this. He looked back at Anakin and forced the blade towards his throat. Windu was full of hatred. His lightsaber style inherently allowed for more darkness to swell within him. He was also a master of keeping his hate in control. As he goes to arrest Anakin, Palpatine calls out to Skywalker and throws him a lightsaber, which Anakin ignites without thinking and begins to defend himself against Mace. It was red. Anakin didn't understand what was happening, but he didn't care. His emotions were unchecked. He needed to protect his family and keep them away from the clutches of the evil Jedi. Windu couldn't believe his eyes. He didn't know what to think. Palpatine leaps forward and joins the fray with another saber. The combined strength of Anakin and Palpatine comprehensively overwhelmed the Jedi Master, and Sidious killed him. Anakin dropped to his knees as he looked at Palpatine. Palpatine explains that he is the Sith Lord, and only together can they ensure Padme and his children's protection from the Jedi. Anakin nodded, pledging himself to the dark side of the Force. He was a blind supporter of Palpatine, and because of his love for the boy over the last few months, he would follow his word and submit to the dark side. Palpatine would tell Anakin that they must go to the Jedi Temple and destroy the Jedi, catching them when they least expected. Anakin's hatred for the Jedi had never been stronger. He despises them far more now than he did in the original timeline, and his lust for revenge against their constant vendetta for him was at its peak. Sidious executes Order 66 and they both journey inside the temple, committing the largest extermination in history. The vast majority of Jedi fell to the clones, but the more experienced such as Plo Koon, Sindralic, and Ki-Adi-Mundi fell to the crimson lightsabers of the Sith. Sidious and Anakin worked together to duel Yoda, the most powerful Jedi within the temple, but he couldn't beat the combined strength of the Sith Lords, and although putting up a valiant effort, he was struck down by Anakin. The Jedi went extinct without even a single survivor. They walked out of the temple as it burned to flames. They had won. Palpatine would explain to the Senate that the Jedi attempted to overthrow Anakin and himself to centralize power with the Jedi. The extreme love that the Senate and Republic had for these two propelled them into dictatorship, where Palpatine assembled the rise of the Empire and made Anakin his right-hand man. Anakin was dubbed Darth Vader, and he was cemented in the history of the Sith. When Padme learned of Anakin's descent, she was distraught, breaking down in tears and terrified of the man in front of him. But she couldn't leave him. She tried, but failed. Anakin threatens her life, his tormented soul compelling her to remain by his side forever, to love him like she did back on Naboo. In the end, Anakin's children were safe, but because of Skywalker's actions, they were released into a new level of harm that they could never imagine the dark side. They were corrupted from a young age and were grown up to become powerful Sith Lords in their own right, as Sidious disbanded the rule of two and announced that the Sith Empire would return. They had complete control over the galaxy, and no one stood in their way. Anakin Skywalker's power was unmatched. He was the chosen one, with the ability to destroy planets with his mind. His power would show no bounds, and he became the most ruthless Sith Lord in history. If you enjoyed today's video, you must watch What If Mace Windu Trusted Anakin and What If Anakin Was Trained from Birth. Please check out our membership page if you would like to support the channel. It really helps us out. Thank you all for watching, and may the Force be with you.